So as a small prelude, I wanted to ask, has anyone had time to read the transcript, or 1/3 of a transcript? I know it's short because like I posted it a few hours ago or a couple of hours, so it's completely understandable that people haven't. But yeah, like any
As you know,
takes?
I just woke up, so I have
Yes,
no
yeah.
idea what this is. Which is
Same
great.
here.
I'm like super excited. This is amazing.
Mm, Yeah, like I think it's even like it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which it's a couple of hours ago since I posted it. But like shortly to say about it, like I don't think there is the introduction to Oxel, but it's also interesting to think how to introduce people to it. So this was an entrance in a way, and I made the experiment of speaking it through. And like I said, I have like 3 times the material that is here. I think actually the most interesting parts are yet to be transcribed, relate to the fiction and some of the other titles that are in the end of this part. Um, but the main thing was to speak it through to get to simpler expression, because I often make the sentences anyway too convoluted to uh, be easier to approach. So I thought maybe this strategy would make things slightly easier. But I do think there's something to the angle, not as the introduction again, but like as a possibility. And the angle is precisely to have, let's have an interlude of saying hello to Eva, and like we can also say welcome.
Eva, you made it. So happy to see you.
Hi. Sorry for crashing the entire thing.
But this was a pre-warned crash, so I don't think you have to be sorry about this, since you gave a notice anyway. So and no worries, I don't think you crashed anything with any amount of damage, I would think.
So, in short, the Swiss Embassy does not have Wi-Fi. That's what I learned.
Are
but
you
the
in
coffee
like
shop next to it.
Okay, a coffee shop.
It's a coffee shop. So I bought coffee.
For a moment, I thought you were in a supermarket, which would
Yeah, I thought so too.
No, like, yeah, it's almost a supermarket because you can buy any sort of coffee and mug, and I don't know what sort of equipment here as well, but for now it's just coffee and Wi-Fi, what I'm paying for. Because you have a new image. I should see that right now.
I've taken to the habit of changing it, like for the sessions. Now that I've found an easy way to change it. So because there is a boring X1, which is formal but and polite, but kind of boring for our session. So it's wants to be somewhat relevant. I'm not promising that it always stays relevant, but it is currently. But yeah, so just to Eva, so we were kind of diving into the topics themselves, so to speak, with an introduction with this rough transcript from today, rough partial transcript, and it as a one entrance towards the study of an oxel. But I can say maybe one thing, which I think had some promise from it, and that is, like, it starts with an example, like a super simple one. Like, I mean, it could be something else than this reading, changing the meaning of reading, and changing the meaning of puzzle alongside of it. But the structure is, I think, has something to it, which is that you get this, in a way, a simple thing, and then it kind of stops to look around of what this is, and then after that it goes to perspectives, and it says that's it, a simplistic little expression of a particle oxel. Let's stop here alongside it and highlight a few perspectives. The oxel, quote unquote, is all these perspectives, or rather it can play as any of them. So it kind of contains a practicalization of this idea that it isn't a game, but it can be a game, or could be a game. So the first one is a game and could have more material, but it's also open up in the later parts. But the second part is the filter, which then comes with this idea that, okay, if you make an oxel that reorganizes reading, it changes every text in the world if you play it, which is a good concretization of the filter effect, but also a good concretization of the potential of oxel-like approach. But then the third perspective is social expression, which then, like, maybe it could be better. It's slightly longer now, but it contains, I think, useful ideas. Like, first of all, starting with this question, who can play this? Now, like, first comes, like, I could play this alone. Like, if I play it, I read differently. There is a new way of approaching reading. But also there can be as many participants as people who just want to enter it, and they can enter together or separately anywhere in the world. And just like social space can be anything, the time can be anything, because if you decide to play it, it's kind of like putting a filter on, and if you take it off, you can always return to it. So I think those perspectives are interesting, and there is a lot to the fiction perspective which I haven't yet typed or transcribed. And maybe we can leave that later, but I think it's equally interesting. And then the layer / offer / practice / form of expression, and finally organization. You don't need all of them. That might be overkill, but it's interesting to look at that it can be all of these things, or could be, like, and it just depends on how you approach it. Anyway, that was a slightly too lengthy introduction of what were the thoughts behind this particular experiment of entrance introduction.
This is incredible. This is amazing. It's so, yeah, it's so densely packed with XORG and stuff. Like, it's really a good recount of a lot of stuff we've been talking about. And it's not easy to put that into a short document. That's great. That's super good.
Yeah, and I think the experiment with speaking things through helped, because, you know, after you transcribe it, then you edit and you can add some complexity, but it's better to kind of start from simple core and extend, rather than like writing something convoluted, which is my particular malady.
Yeah.
Others might have a different experience, but it's been useful so far. But this might be useful also to the relation to the main topic, or the because I think there is a way to, or one particular interesting way to start to introduce Oxel to the world. Dramatic music ensues for a moment. And of course, if such an introduction is done, it's also good to have some entrances. That relates to the topic of today. any comments on this, or shall we
Dun, dun,
jump?
dun, 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 dun.
Points for the music.
I just want to offer my the Oxel X-Play game show that I made for the Oxel. You can use it if you want here or anywhere.
The game show, was that
The explanation I made of the Oxel through a game where you look at
yes.
your surrounding and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, there is actually a kind of interesting continuation, like one of my last week's weird little moments is that I made a game show game called Schmucker, based on Tucker Carlson. And I kind of made the whole rules to it, which could be an Oxel in itself, but maybe that's a topic for another time. But it allows you to play any game show. But maybe it's a diversion for now. Although I think it's might be an interesting game in itself. But maybe for later. But yeah, so okay, so part of the things that I yet not transcribed, I was thinking of the question of, okay, how do you express these? Like, and like, what is the way to express quote unquote rules of play? And then immediately comes the answer is that if it's a social game, it's whatever way you choose is like the general answer towards that. Like, there is no, like, you must express it this way or that way. There has to be this sort of variance. Just like the social world has all kinds of ways of describing, let's say, instructing, roughly speaking, people, whether it's diagrams, whether it's text, whether it's text and diagrams. And all of that range is in the social discourse potentially of oxels. But at the same time, saying everything is kind of bland and vague. And I was interested in like how to instigate more structural approaches towards this. And this led me to play around with the idea of the offer. Now, if one thinks like you create an oxel, let's say, I mean, this was reading, there is the earlier, let me invert my screen graphics to, there was this earlier sketch of the gem as oxel. But so if one thinks that you can create a description to it, but how could such things work like an organization? And in a way, you can think of any move you can make in a game as an offer, because it really is an offer. Like if there is a game in the world, even a traditional game, and in a way that game is an offer in itself. Like, let's say a chess is standing on a table. It's like a standing offer. Like, you can take the chess and take the offer of playing it. But then if you nest down into the chess, if you start playing it, every move is an offer. Like, every player at every moment faces like, well, I could take the offer of moving that piece and it would happen in this manner, or that piece and that piece. And of course, this is a perspective once again, like it's also a move in itself, but one can think of it as an offer to you because of its right-like qualities. So that opens this possibility perspective that if one thinks of expressing these genes with the mind of that they offer themselves, that is that they offer moves to play the game, but they could expand that to moves that are kind of like moves in an organization. This opens up both a kind of structural possibility, that is how oxels could relate to other oxels. It starts to resemble the possibility of how organizations relate to other organizations. You know, like there is this, I don't know, co-op somewhere, and the co-op makes an offer of a membership. Or they make an offer to another co-op of collaboration, and that comes in a form of people from their other co-op having rights, that is moves into the co-op itself. Like that pattern itself is possible with oxels. And
You mean, quick question, like to model organizations as oxels connected through offers?
yeah, or it as a kind of like easy first instrument of building structure between oxels.
Yeah.
The networking quality.
I can see it totally working just with those two things as nodes and edges of a network. Super powerful concepts. That's super interesting.
And it has this sort of interesting quality, like going back to this example, how every chess move or the chess game itself is an offer, and then every move in the game is an offer, that it allows you to think, because the oxel is about how do you play it, is that every game description can be thought of as an offer itself. And this kind of works, because if you think like, okay, here's something game-like, and it says you can do this move and you can do that move. What if it said, if you do this move, if you create output this and this, you get back this? Like, to put it in banal terms, if you do this move, you get 10 tokens. Or you get another move you can make into the game itself. Now, this is mirroring what happens in an organization. It's also mirroring quote unquote jobs. Like job being like, if we are offering you this move, if you make this move and it creates this output, we give you whatever tokens for your work. So it's easy to add qualities that are more traditionally organizational into the oxels as well. Is it somewhat clear? Like, I might be describing it too structurally, but is it making any sense?
It is making a lot of sense to me, at least.
Yeah.
What about others?
I'm still just returning to the topic after a while, so I'm mostly listening for now, but it makes sense what you're talking about.
Yeah, no worries. Like, I can understand that there is a period of landing, and also it's maybe not the most concrete of my expressions because of thinking about this abstractly, but like I do have like having thought through examples of this, like in a way, like thinking these sort of wonky things, like something presenting itself as a game, which anyway kind of describes itself or defines itself as moves, or can be expressed as moves at least. If you start to include into those moves things coming back, whether they are token-like things, right-like things, you're already like essentially all the way into what an organization. And so the bridge is actually kind of towards what we traditionally expect from organizations is surprisingly short and crossable. And like in relation to this, like I was thinking about how to open this up or describe this to people at large. Like one way to look at this is like if you take the two concepts of, let's take just roles and scenes, and think that both roles and scenes offer moves or give you moves. And if you now take this approach to, say, a normal game like chess, this is kind of true. Like you become, the role is, say, the white player or the black player. Those are the two roles that chess offers. And immediately they come with moves. It's like, say, the white player is, in the beginning of the game, the white player has a move open of moving a piece, which is, of course, controlled by all the rules, but that's really how the play happens, that like suddenly there is this opening that the white player can make a move, which then when they make a move, then the role called the black player has the right to make a move, and so it goes forward. So that's kind of a role-based, agent-based way of opening moves. But similarly, you could approach things by scenes, which is like a board of a board game could be a scene, but also like any situation you create can be a scene. And what it can also offer moves. Like, let's say we have a scene of, to take this from an organizational side, a scene of voting. Well, the scene of voting, if you're invited to the scene of voting, perhaps by you having a role, means that you are invited to the scene of voting. That's your key to get there. That scene offers the move of voting. Let's say there's like two proposals, or there's one proposal and then it offers you the move of voting yes or voting no. That's the moves. And they are open in that scene only. Like once the voting ends, those moves go away. But they lead to a result, like vote landing to collective yes or no. And that's kind of an example of a scene-based paradigm. But both kind of lead to moves, which is then the sort of bridge between organizational form and a game-like form as a concept. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. One thing that it's becoming like super apparent right now to me, which is interesting with this model filter or whatever, is how the offer comes from the game, right? And the game is created by the players. So it's kind of the relationships between them. The offers between the players create the offers of the game, creating the game itself. Like sort of, yeah, the connections between where does the game emerge from being a source of, or the source being the relationships between the people playing in this case. So that's really interesting. The space of rules, the space of grammar, the space of language.
Yeah, and it's both this sort of like starting from this perspective approach, like it's a perspective to say something is an offer, and it's a perspective to say something is a move, but both can apply. The main question is like, if I look at it from a perspective of an offer, does it work? Like very summarily speaking. And then it can be an offer, it can be approached as an offer. The same question would apply to the move or any other thing in itself. Like So it's not so much an is question, but it's really like, can it work as? And from this perspective, like if we look at, say, a game in terms of an offer or in terms of moves, both work. But this, using these perspectives allows to co-align what we traditionally think of as organization, say, per the earlier example of voting, a common organizational behavior in board. Like we can think of those as moves, but we can also think of them as offers because they are very much Venn diagramic in their nature. Is like, so maybe if you open up voting for everyone, well, that's an offer for everyone, but of course you could offer it for only particular people. That the condition of the offer is you are a member, that is, you have a role in this organization. If you have that, you get the offer of voting yes or no. Like the main thing here is the structure.
You know, how you've got like the events that are happening, and yeah, and then the might be like, do you accept the event? And like that, I think is just yeah, it's interesting, like on a philosophical point of view, at least, event as occurring or not, you know.
Leo, you were cutting off.
And so like every event. Oh, shoot.
You said like it's an interesting as a philosophical point of view. Then you cut off for maybe 10 seconds or 7 seconds, and then you came back.
That's yeah, I didn't have much to say. I was just saying like yeah, like do you accept the event, right? And the event is an offer. And like the events that happen in our lives are offers. And do you accept them as being an event, right? And so I'm just thinking about that in terms of like the event queue of an interface, and to whether you update like the, you know, the whether you update the styles, or you update like how things look based on things emitting the messages, emitting the events. And then do you accept that or not, you know? And then how does that change your interface?
Yes, and like it could be called an event, or that's a valid perspective as well. Like the event scene, those kind of overlap. Like both are fine. Like I like the scene, but like I'm not some kind of universal controller of that, so you could use an event as well. But I think like why I brought this sort of, let's say, the perspective of the role and perspective of the scene is because like with those two, you can cover a lot of ground. Like in a way, like sometimes you're designing from a scene-like perspective. Like if you're designing an interaction of voting or some similar, like a basic interaction you want to set, say in the middle of an organization, say in the middle of a game, it's often very scene-based. But then you consider which roles enter it. And this is like if the scene-based was almost more environmental situation, environment in terms of time and space, then the role is more agentual, like agentic, that there is this bunch of moves given to a person who is then given different scenes that they can enter into, but they travel with them as a way to create an agent operating in the space. And like ultimately you can take like any organization or any game and you can cover quite a lot just with that. Of course, you could add other concepts of our earlier tools, the setting, etc. And I have some ideas towards that, but I think even that simplicity offers a lot. But it also offers a lot then looking at this sort of oxels as like, in a way, like I think on the outset you're offering kind of a game, but if you're interested in terms of networking, how Oxel could relate to another Oxel and create networks, then bringing this point of view of thinking about how it offers itself, and maybe making extended offers, like you create an offer of the gem Oxel, and then if you create inside of that, like some kind of a, roughly speaking, a group that develops different kinds of gems and that offers memberships, quote unquote, that is roles, that can be part of the gem organizing itself. And in a way, it forms a natural continuation of the Oxel.
So yeah, could you expand how you see the relationship between Oxel and or like the and gem?
So in a way, like you could make the gem into not an Oxel. You could make it into just a gem. So what's the interesting point of making it into an Oxel as like essentially operating in the Oxel space? I think the interest is precisely the sort of potential relations. Like if it's in an Oxel space, it's kind of like in a network already. Like to take a simple example, maybe the reading Oxel from the earlier transcription is not the most interesting example, but you could say, okay, I'll take the Oxel of a gem, and then I bring everybody through the reading Oxel into it, like they are in relation, and that forms a kind of a package or cluster in itself. So what it essentially offers for the gem is this extended modifiability, that the function is not just gems, but actually kind of larger network of modifying possibilities, filtering possibilities, playing possibilities around it. Maybe I have a better example. Like if somebody created an, let's say, an Oxel of like different kinds of play with images, like essentially like how to view them, for example, in a tarot-like fashion, you could bring that into making of gems. And it would form a natural kind of way of them being in the same medium or the same system of play that the Oxel offers. So it kind of gives surroundings for the gem that allow its play to extend and incorporate, relate to other things, other Oxel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I guess
Yeah.
I'm still always a little shaky on the whole Oxel thing. But yeah, I think I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure I get the GM thing.
I think it's partly the challenge of the whole idea in itself, like which is why like working on this sort of introductions or entrances towards it is useful, because I do think it's still challenging, but I also do think it's powerful. Like this sort of the basic seed, like the basic cultural operation, that if I create And let's see if my screen do, 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 could address the topic. So this super simple but basic idea that there's just this text of an Oxel called reading, and it's super simple thing in itself. But what it does as a text is redefine reading, and therefore redefining reading as puzzle solving, redefining the practice of it as walking around, like first framing a field of text, then walking around in this field, like maybe reading backwards and forwards and stopping at points, etc., with the question what puzzles I can perceive there. And also the puzzles are redefined to be something that is fertile to generate the surprising response. So I'm essentially using that to look for quote unquote puzzles, and then once I find puzzle, I find responses to it. It, in all its simplicity and basicness, it still, as a cultural operation, has redefined all text. And that's the thing I want to frame out. Like there's power, there's kind of a superpower to that operation.
Kind of the whole, sorry, very fast, the whole explanation is building up for this to sink in, right? Like that's such a powerful thing to see from the Oxel, that really, yeah, building the moment where this becomes apparent is the best way to explain it, I think.
Yeah. And the whole Oxel is really, okay, there is this superpower, which is essentially like culturally floating or drifting. It doesn't really have a system around it. It doesn't have a way to play it, or it doesn't have a convention of how the culture uses it. If one systematically builds around it, constructs, like taps into that power and builds to support it, that in itself is, let's say, the key challenge of the Oxel. And then, of course, that leads to this question, okay, how it's expressed and how it's organized, which then should come from this goal or challenge of trying to build around that power and trying to build different ways of utilizing that power.
May I have a question? Just to relate it perhaps to what I've been running into here, like during the course and also during starting to have conversations around the conference. And I guess that's kind of trying to sense what are the necessary bridges, or like, I don't know, bridges is the right metaphor, but more like the scaffolding, or what needs to be built around for those concepts to start resonating with, let's say, people who are working in organizations here, which are getting open to some kind of transitioning or changes. So I'll be specific, right? Okay, so some of the organizations I was speaking with for the conference here are looking towards, let's say, more regenerative ways of functioning, or they are kind of looking into how to become eco-social enterprises, but also how to start like functioning, not just like surviving, but also thriving, and what is needed in the ecosystem, what kind of infrastructures, what kind of organizational changes or changes in like collaboration. And so this is some of the concerns that they are like voicing, right? And I know that now we are like moving and thinking on completely whole different level, but what I'm thinking is like being able to start at least partially like reaching in language or explanations to them. That's my challenge. That's what I'm trying to somehow do. And what I, for example, If you're okay with me, like
Mhm.
unfolding this question further.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll share may I share a screen for a very brief moment?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing. And
Yeah,
if you don't have the
because-
rights to it, wait a second, I'll find you. You can test it already, but have to I'll have to do it here, all right? Yes, you should have the rights to share the screen.
Okay. I'll try share screen. And so, yeah, before it jumps there, so I will say a bit more of the context. And so some of the organizations, or what is kind of the point of interest, is how to restructure or reimagine the organizational forms and the business models in such a way that they are like not just going towards sustainability, but like, let's say, regeneration, regenerative ways of functioning, whatever it means. And then one organization which is kind of on the forefront here, they are creating, like, let's say, a organization design methodology and process of facilitation, which helps kind of it comes from the donut, let's say, the donut model. And this level of intervention or kind of thinking or organizational design thinking, that is tangible. That's what they are like what they can understand, and that it's kind of giving them, yeah, this is here. So this is parts of the methodology of like of organizational change, let's say. And when I was trying to speak about the XORG approach with one of the designers, there were glimpses of, oh yeah, okay, so this could help, I don't know, like it could help make parts of the process more playful, or it could help jump out of some of the conventional patterns of thinking. But what they brought up to me was like, hey, so look at this kind of, for example, and I found a different mind map, but like, so this is a, let's say, one possible mind map of what are all the different kinds of structures and patterns for a viable business or organization, and all of those fitting together to make it like run and make it persistent, make it do what it needs to be doing. And within this complexity, the question for me was like, okay, so how does the organization even start thinking of bringing the XORGian concepts so they don't just stay like on the level of aesthetic tinkering, and yet they have some, yeah, what could be the first initial steps for them, for us to see and feel what it can bring, compared or contrasted, for example, to those things that they are imaginable, they're tangible, they're relevant for them. And so that's how I'm thinking, like how to start building the bridges conceptually, or in terms of like mini practices or mini testing with them. Because yeah, I'm for me it's yeah, I guess how could, and perhaps again this is perhaps me bringing too much premature practicality questions towards it, but I guess like related to the conference, that's yeah. So
yeah, it's no, it's a good question, first of all, like and like first I would say is like I don't think we have as a culture the answers already of how we are organized in the future. I think we're in a situation where we have to yes, we have to find solutions now, but we also have to vastly expand our discourse and the tools of that discourse of what is organization and how are we organized. Like we cannot just start from the conventional models. Like, for example, I'm not against like the mind mapping, and I might be missing something, but quickly taking a look as you were sharing it. Like if you start from the basic analytics of how business divides itself, it kind of locks you into certain ways of thinking of how a business can be. Like even with that, you kind of build like, well, all the arts organizations. It might be useful, but it also kind of limits you in a certain way. And
perhaps
that's
I was just to clarify the point why I was showing the mind map, because that was when I was presented this kind of, okay, so the argument was like from the designer, it was like, okay, so the functioning structures of a business are very layered, very complex, and have been evolving for a very long time, and the actual viable forms are like very the chance that when you make some hacking or changes will keep the organization persistent or even better are like 0.0%, and that like that given this complexity, they cannot imagine how this kind of hacking could lead to something like let's say consistent improvements. And I understand that we are on a completely different level of discourse, right? Because now we're in the sense of like a basic research of like expanding the discourse and the tools and all the different steps towards actually like testing the fitness or viability are like completely different layer or completely different context. So perhaps it's not relevant in this kind of space or discussion, but yeah, I guess I'm trying to find ways in my mind how to start building the bridges conceptually or like in discussions and dialogues with people. I guess that would
okay.
be
Yeah. So to visit that issue, like in a way, it kind of contains the argument that the business model is already exhausted. Yet we can already point out that, say, if you pick crypto organizations, they're kind of struggling within the business model. That's not to say that it's not useful for them to check against what is your business model in itself. But even these currently, you could already say conventional DAO structures, like if you take nouns, for example, you wouldn't build nouns with a basic business model. That's not the thinking that it would take you. Yet it's a functional, I mean, I'm not inside of there. I don't know how functional it's internally, but at least it has a functioning economy and functioning activity in itself. And it's proving already that this new medium, by being programmed organizations where people are distributed across the world, is already like pushing us out of those models. So in a way, their argument is, while sensible as a checking point, is not sensible as like this is what it is and it will not come out of there because we already have proof in the pudding that things are pushing out of there. And this relates back to how we need this sort of wider tools of discourse, like having discourse of what organization is and wider sense of tools and structures that can be used to build organization. Now, coming back to their own example, like you posted the donut organization slides earlier, and like said back then, it's useful to check and very kind of interesting case in itself. But it's already a case where you're kind of starting not from a normal business model, kind of a counter to their argument, but you're starting from actually a no structural design paradigm, because they didn't come up with the donut model. It has existed, like the circular design and using the circular paradigm of how you're organizing information is much older. And really the donut model is just that. It's saying, let's make this into an organization. So it's actually not starting from the business model, it's starting from information organizational paradigm and then fitting the business questions towards that. So they're kind of doing something similar, but they're only picking one model and then saying, let's stick to this, which is good in a sense of like you might be more direct in coming to real like direct solutions, but it's still like it's a rather limited palette in itself. Now, if I contrast this to say board games and the kind of different formal languages of board games, and somebody coming up with, let's say, with an interesting board game that has a circular model of laying out the play, structuring the play. what would happen in a board game design culture is not that even the designer probably wouldn't expect that now every game after this will be the circular model. It wouldn't be let's all make all the games now to be circular models, but it's like, hey, I added this to the palette, and then people would look at, oh, it has this kind of interaction properties. That's very useful. Maybe I design part of my game utilizing the circle, so I make a subboard with the circle in itself. Like you can see these patterns, like how, for example, worker placement structures have developed in board games in itself. And I'm kind of looking like that the organization would need a similar open discourse where it's much more, yes, it's about optimizing models and finding their strengths and weaknesses, but it's also about diversity of models. And in a way, like said earlier, their case is already an example of that, because they just picked one model and said, like, no, actually our anchor is this circular organization of information. And then we built everything cascading from there. So they
Yeah, and
went
I would
to,
say, I'm sorry, it was not about the circular organizational information. It was just a scaffolding for actually changing the structural aspects of the business or the organization in such a way that
yes,
it would be like, yeah. But yeah,
that's what I mean
agree.
by
And
cascading
yeah.
from there.
Mhm.
So you pick that and then you cascade from there. But
Mhm.
what you've done there is you picked one model, and but that should tell you that, okay, maybe it's useful to pick other models and develop other models, and you can still apply, you could even apply to oxels like traditional business practices, but it's merely to create this discourse space of like not coming up with one and then closing the door again, but actually systematically opening the door to this more open discourse of what are the future structures of organization. And this is why I use the board game approach, which is has had a fairly open door of coming up with yet another model and yet another model of dividing information towards interaction in itself. And I don't think it's an accident that that field as a culture of what kind of interactions we can have has had like a couple of golden decades of constant evolution, like, and reinventing itself and adding to its like palette of possible forms, which is something I think organization as a wide concept would sorely need, but it's lacking. So
Yes.
so
And I
this,
guess Mhm.
do say.
Sorry. Yeah. That what is kind of differentiating in my mind is the, let's say, I completely because so let's say there is like at least two or three layers of coming up from me. So one layer is the organizations that are starting to adopt this kind of practice of reinventing themselves, like according this specific, I don't know, donut model, because they have some constraints. They do not have spare resources to do anything like any kind of experimenting. So for them, this is the thing that helps them move where they need to, because they just like don't have time, energy, or desire to or to be experimenting in another way. But there is another lever, which is the actual design studio, which came up with this kind of model, because I think, and this is kind of getting closer to whom might be interested in the XORGian kind of experimentation, because they picked the donut model and they could have picked some other kind of model, or they could have designed their own. So I think this kind of organization, kind of meta, which are thinking around organizational design, are closer to be able to appreciate the discourse or the what might be opening up. Yet it seems that it was still a bit difficult for me to start relating the, and I guess, I mean, that's because I'm not you, and so I'm not able to be so eloquent, right? But I guess that this is closer to the possible target group of whom might be understanding, appreciating, or even testing and implementing the XORGian playing. And what came up to my mind when you're speaking about, like, oh, let's say if we actually offered the company a board game with this kind of, let's say, kind of donut process, then this would be already, and then there could be, it's like, hey, by the way, this was generated by an underlying deeper generative process called XORGing or whatever. And then I think it's me trying to find a bridge in this constraint of a conference where people will be coming and they will be having their own more or less narrow filters on what they are interested or might be interested in, what's kind of adjacent possible and adjacent relevant. And yeah, so I guess that this is where my kind of bridging need or desire or pull is coming from, if it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense, and it's a kind of a good question. Like, at least from my side, I don't know about others, but I think this in itself is a good reflection. Like, I would say, in a way, like this company is one case in itself. Like, of course, there could be other cases. Like, for example, it could be that in this case of this company is that they're in a situation that they have one product. They're very much like, having read the slides, approaching this as a product, which is this sort of like, the strategy of the product is you try to make the one size fits all into a general truth, which is how companies work. Like, everybody should use our product, and they, which is also the problem with that, like, kind of communication. And this is also sometimes my problem with many forms of facilitation now that take game approaches. The pattern is almost always the same, like liberating structures. It's like it makes a particular game, but then it turns it into almost like pseudo religion. It's like you always use this technique, like, because our techniques are the best, you always start with this interaction, and then you choose from these 8, but these 8 only, kind of thing. Whereas, like, if you think the discourse of human organization, the discourse is not to turn into religion where you always start from the same structures, but you're creating more like a grammar, where it's like, oh, you choose your own structures in and of themselves. Like, we're trying to enable this sort of wide mapping of possibilities. So, but to your point, let's say somewhat pragmatically, because I do think it's a valid point, like, and this is kind of regardless of this particular case, because, like I said, they might be in a state where they're really looking for the product because they seem to be very product oriented, and probably want to fixate on that because they want to turn that circular
Yeah,
thing.
I think because just sort of brief context elucidation, because they started as service designers and then started looking into transition design and like how to help systemic change towards like transition towards more regenerative ways of functioning. And this was one of the attempts for which they got like rewards because it like was recognized as because they open sourced the facilitation process and product. So it's not that like they want to productize this thing. It's like their attempt and a gift of towards some higher values, let's say, in this case. But they will be at a conference, so that might be an interesting point of discussion.
Yeah, it might be. Also, like, their other approach, which I think came from the same people, if it's people who made that slide set, was Sudoku based, which is another example of taking a game form, not the business form, as a starting point, because like the slides contained the circular information model and kind of a pseudo take on Sudoku. Wasn't really Sudoku, but sort of. But it's another example of the structure being that you take an interaction form from games and then you cascade, meaning that's your dominant point. You bring the business after that. But going to the pragmatic point, I was meaning to go earlier, to a general conversation. Now, things like the gym might be useful also towards general discourse. And to use the gym as an example is, let's say we offer this gym, which is a discourse point towards meme culture, which is rather large. Not so much business oriented, yes, but also much larger than a particular business. But then you open up how in the meme you have the basic interaction being replication or mirror of the traditional interaction of the viewer spectator. It's like you look at a meme and then you think whether you like it or not, which is what happens when you look at an art piece, or whether it's a movie or a painting or whatever. So in a way, like in the heart of the meme, there is something utterly traditional. Like even though you can always create new memes, but those new memes are viewed similarly in a conventional manner. So the whole idea of the gene being like, let's actually change the interaction, that you just get ingredients and you have to build from that. Now, why that could be a point of discourse is of course, then it's offering something for that culture as a shift in a way. Like it's not saying it has to be better than memes and everybody has to do genes rather than memes, but it's saying like, hey, we can expand the space, and then we can get out of the limitations of memetics. Whether one wants to say it in that manner, I do think memetics are somewhat limited, but that's neither here or there what I think. But nevertheless, I think precisely this kind of point of discourse, if it gets communicated, is an interesting point of starting to have a discourse with other people. And it's and that's a different example. Works very differently than doing a particular design for other operation. Both are possible. I think your idea of like producing something for them, like the for the people design studio, whatever, that's also possible. But like that's not the only way to have a discourse. Is to talk with companies. It also potentially is to talk with culture, as dramatic as that sounds. But like saying or formulating that there is a different expansion shift from memes, and here's how you can play them, is having a discourse with culture, more or less. So yeah, I think both are important, but I do think like
yeah, I guess for me it's like kind of the question when having a discourse with culture, who is the ears and the receptive, like who embodies the culture and who is able to listen? Because if it's not the companies, or if it's not the individuals, or if it's not the specific actors, then I'm not sure what I'm discoursing with, or like who is the receptive tissue of the culture. But I guess, yeah, I mean, so
but that happens all the
yeah,
time.
thanks for
Like people have, like if somebody proposes, like let's go back into history, like somebody proposes citizen concept, that's discourse with culture, and that didn't happen by them offering to them to companies, etc. And it's not that, I don't think it's not the companies, not the people, it's all of them. It just has like a different kind of engagement point. It's like you as a participant of the culture, whether you're a company or a person, might be interested in this in terms of your interest of what you want from the culture, like culture in the widest sense, like the environment you live in, and how you might want to change that. And therefore, your engagement with that might be a small contribution towards that change. And like if you look back, much of the changes in culture are precisely that there is an idea that doesn't fit the current piping of like goes through a company and addresses companies and is from the get-go a real product to sell, but it's rather like actually comes from the outside, but reflects on the products, the pipings of culture in itself, but also proposes different pathways. And like I said, like I'm saying, both are possible and both are maybe useful to think in terms of strategical directions. But I do think the culture angle is important alongside, let's say, more direct approaches. The direct approaches that you're bringing are completely viable and feasible and should be approached. But I do think there is worthwhile, even with all its risks, you never know who engages with such proposals and how and so on. But such a route of making such, let's say, cultural proposals is, I mean, it's bland to say like high risk, high reward, but it kind of is. And that is, you're not so assured of the direct routes towards engagement or financial gains or whatever. But at the same time, if you manage to make a change, the change is most likely to be more comprehensive, and more significant in a way. So yeah, I think both things matter. Like for me, like maybe just to add like a personal note. I mean, that's a funny thing to say, as if I haven't been personal all the way through, but more personal note is like for me, there's this urgency of expanding the discourse of how we organize is both culturally critical, because I don't think let's just build more companies and things are solved. Let's build more co-ops and things are solved. Like it's not really cutting it. We can already see it. And then at the same time that we have this sort of different ways of interactions, not just the games, but just this sort of sense of a horizon that, for example, games can suggest, that we could be together, we could interact together, which, like, if those interactions develop a pattern, then it's organization. That's it in a nutshell. If we are able to have this wider discourse, we're both operating for an urgent need, but also addressing, for me, really a cultural pain point. I'm not interested in building yet another corporation, maybe as a tool, maybe as an instrument of getting things forward, but not to kind of concentrate on. It's not interesting, and it's also not addressing the problems overall. But engaging this question of like, could we open the space? Could we expand the space of how do we conceive ourselves as organized? What kind of interactions do we have? Is, like, personally for me, highly interesting.
Yeah, and I'm like, I completely understand and I guess resonate with your points. Yeah, it just the constraints of the world I'm currently inhabiting make it difficult for me to construct viable bridges in my mind to be able to start bringing the discourse into those like specific events, for example. So that's what I'm, yeah, and it's not a criticism in any way. It's more like it's making visible my processing of how to frame, for example, the presence in Brno in such a way that it can be relatable to the people who are going to be there or something like that. Yeah, but that might not be for this session.
Yeah, but it's a good question, and I like I said, I think this, at least from my side, is very fertile to think, and it's not that space should be rejected, or on the contrary, like it's just like it's part of the palette of tactics, strategy, of like approaches, and certainly should be there, like trying to find that. But it's almost like at the same time not forgetting that, because much of the world kind of pushes you to forget anything that is not in the pipes. Like, I mean, this was one of my main reasons of exiting arts, like systematically exiting, was like the whole system was essentially forming this sort of like, here's how you should behave in an arts career piping system. And then actually kind of like looking outside of it was increasingly rejected, because the more efficient the piping was, the more it rejected something that went outside of it. Like, or you want to create something that is more about lasting impact rather than a momentary event. which is the paradigm of traditional artwork, we don't really have a structures for that. We can have a festival and then you can have an impact for a week, but then we don't have any structure that continues from that. And if the point is continues from that, then we get kind of like awkward and don't really know what to do with that, and or stop receiving your emails, whatever. So like that's an example of it. But like similarly, like here, it's like when the world kind of pushes you to forget everything that is outside the gears, outside the piping, it's not against the gears and the piping. It's more that that kind of point of view outside of it has to be actively kept alive, because the world is not going to keep it alive.
Yeah, I love this image or this framing. That yeah, and I mean I resonate with it very much. I guess it's kind of like, yeah, not forgetting this, or like keeping this alive is of utmost importance. And yeah, finding the bridge to the gears and pipes or gardens or whatever. Another
a final short associated anecdote is like, as I mentioned, like in some of the sessions of XORG before Economic Space Agency, there was Social Space Agency, and these are very, very loosely, remotely related. Well, the relation is really the name, but also the concept of space. That is like the Social Space Agency started with this concept of, like, in a way, our social space is more like in the paradigm of roads. And every convention, you go to a cafe and there's like what you should do, or you should walk to the counter and then you should make your order, and then you get a new road opens, which is like go to your seat, and like you can go through the whole social reality of the city, and you're kind of seeing roads if you look at it this way. And then the concept of social space and Social Space Agency was, okay, how do we go out of this space? This created, like, this was the NASA combination, because NASA has a systematic approach to go to outer space. And this was kind of loaning that concept of, if we have these spaces, then how do we get like outside of beside the road? And what can we systematically build outside the existing roads? And how can we bring information back to the normal social space, that such a space exists, and how to be there, which are, by the way, almost a replication of NASA's principles and objectives, funnily enough. So that kind of associates with here. This is talking about the same thing in a way. Like, it just like, how do we conceive organizations, and what is the space beyond the current roads of organization, which is like, do you make a co-op or a business? If you make a business, how do you make it, and so on. It's not excluding those, but it's more like, how do you also have tools to travel outside of those roads?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Pekka, for engaging with those questions.
Hopefully others didn't find this.
Yeah, I hope also it's not too boring and too pragmatic for the.
It's totally okay. I think it's important to, yeah, devise strategies for filtering these organizations, right? Like, what's filtering, I guess I mean like virally invading other organizations in a way that the Xorgian virus and other ideas with affinity to self-organization and play can, yeah, invade these structures, including companies. Maybe a lot of them would collapse. That would be great. Imagine companies collapsing because they start playing Xorgian games. That would be amazing.
Yes. I kind of think like, I don't know if we'll get there today, but like from the kind of premises that where we started, there's a way to design something that is very much like a game, but invite people to that is more like an organization. And like also there's a kind of dialogue between those two qualities that you can put the organization level to light or heavy or whatever. And it would be an interesting, maybe it's another offering socially, but like if one, yes, could create, say, a gym, but then you could build this sort of like things that are offered like games. It's not that you have to, sit on their boards, not that they usually even have such, but every week, or they can be much lighter, much more game-like. Like if somebody makes a game, it's a very, in a way, light offer. They put it out to the world and maybe people play in it, that is organized themselves by it. But you could make such things, but then tune up the kind of like that you can not just be there for the 2 hours that the game is active, it can leave traces, moves, yes, like, and moves that essentially built like rights towards that organization, and then possibilities to operate through it. Like I actually, because these kind of games, because they lead to expressions or changes, then those are kind of like outputs in a similar manner as a traditional organization is to be something that you operate through to create an output that is enabled by that organization. If you create a game that makes you create different kind of output with other people, then you're looking at the same pathway. And if you start to give them moves as kind of lasting rights or long-term rights, you could even add token economies if you wished. It's an interesting ground, and if, let's say, alongside the game gym, if we would make an example of that, it might be an interesting offering to make, a proposal to make. Maybe it's a cultural offering, or probably is, but still, I think it might be nevertheless be interesting.
So, I mean, I don't know. Like, one, as I definitely appreciate and resonate with the want to bring this into the practical life and stuff. And yeah, that is the challenge, right? And I think that is the question that you were asking. And yeah, I mean, for me, like, if there's one thing I might say is like just breaking down their current organization into like the different parts, right? Like into roles, and like just giving people the ability to deconstruct the situation of their organization into these component parts. Like we don't have to like go to people necessarily with a given like product or with a given organization, but what's more important, I think, is just like the point of view that we transmit to others, which allows them to deconstruct organization, and then from there, like, have the tools themselves to be like, hey, well, what if we did that, right? So the breaking things down into like roles, rights, and obligations is honestly like that's already a lot, and that's pretty accessible, I think.
Yes, I agree. Like that kind of direction. In addition to like flipping on and off or dialing between, is the mode play, like roughly speaking, fictive or not? Like, are we actually having this 2 days, this new style of organization, and then tuning it down to test something? Is a possibility that you can add on top of that. Like I completely agree with Leo's starting points, but then if you start like, okay, now that we have these roles, let's change my role for 2 days, and it's kind of like playing, but then after 2 days we go back or we go to another permutation, but we have as an anchor our quote unquote real way of organizing.
Yeah, and like, so we with the like doing like a little garden here, and you know, we just broke down the roles of the garden, turn them into cards, and now you can exchange them with other people, and like we can change roles, and there's like that, you know, and yeah, I don't know. That's also why I really just love the card as something that can not only you can deconstruct anything into as a concept, and then you've got it in a thing, but you can also move it around. And so yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really effective way of going out there and being like, hey,
That's such a beautiful example that, yeah, in this case you really made it accessible by just writing it on a piece of paper and passing it around, right?
that's literally it. Like, it didn't take more than 5 minutes, and we just sat down at a table and we're like, all right, everyone, so what do we need? All right, what are the different tasks? How do we want to group them? And then now these things are transferable and can be positioned in different areas, potentially creating interfaces in the environment, right? Just putting a square on any surface, like, and now you have a slot.
Mhm.
In the real world, right? Like, you can just draw a square on a table, and now you have a slot, and you can just label it or something, and now your environment has become programmable.
Agreed, and this is precisely like the approach and the kind of atmosphere that you have in game culture. Like, if people are playing role-playing games, it's like, now somebody says, now you are arrived into this kind of room, and I just made this room from 3 different random tables getting 3 words, and it's okay because it's the kind of culture that they have. Like, how to bring this as a range of possibilities, not necessarily in that form, but kind of, I think Leo put it quite nicely, how this contains a certain kind of like flexibility and wider palette of thinking about how are you organized. But Eva, since you have to unfortunately leave, and we've been nerding out and offering you a cold landing, perhaps, or however you feel about the landing. Do you have any comments, last words, whatever you want?
Last words. I hope to be back fully next week with passport and everything I need.
That's good. That is a good last word. It has substance in it. And yes, I think the message, like, in the other side of the door, okay, no, it was lost. So she came through the door but didn't read what was on the other side of the door. But because my idea was that when she comes, we could like actually generate the message. But might have been an interesting question, but I forgot it. So that's but it can be potentially used next time if it's needed, because it's sort of a flippant idea. But it sort of worked, perhaps because she came here, so maybe that was a partially a lure. But yeah, like, I think like this, like taking Leo's bridging comments, like a smooth way of building bridges towards what Jakob was saying. I think that's kind of pointing out how this is a useful conversation that you're opening up, Jakob. Like it, and it's kind of precisely the spanning. Like I said, it's important to keep the space alive that nobody else will keep alive for you. On the other hand, it's important to reach out from there and not just be arrogantly closured in a bubble. So both sides are important, and these kind of tools of, because we kind of sort of we already have and kind of could quite quickly produce like different ways of finding the Lego piece seams from a traditional organization. We have kind of done such things, but we probably now could do it even better. So that's one way to engage, for example, and then continuing from there to like constructing the Lego pieces in different ways, like this example of playing the organization or having this dial of organization being in a play mode for whatever 2 days, and navigating in the middle by the so-called real organization, like how it's usually organized, is already a extension, and there could be other extensions towards such Lego pieces.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just like I really think, and I think, you know, the point, and I think blah, my words.
Yes.
Yes, but what I meant to say was, yeah, man, all I really think it takes is some object that you can write on, like a piece of paper or something, or a Miro board or something, and then like a square, which can even be like another piece of paper, or like just a square in a Miro board, which kind of points also like we had mentioned a while ago creating a XORG interface for like how we want to like organize around different stuff, like Martin's proposal and all of that. And I really think like, yo, like let's set up and maybe this can even help us develop skills. I don't know, but just a Miro board if we had one, and then we just created slots for different things and started creating an interface together of how potentially we would want to relate to different things with XORG, right? Like we kind of dropped that conversation, and I'd like to see it revitalized, and it's pretty low key, honestly. It's just like squares and cards, you know.
Yeah, I think like definitely we could use that as one kind of way of concretizing the approaches. Like, I think currently we sort of have a selection of directions of, well, concretization in one hand, and also maybe ways to express, work towards something to propose to the world. And I think, like, if we want to, we might be at the point of selecting that, like, or deciding to, you know, come out, but then that probably needs like a certain consistent effort, not necessarily massive, but still a consistent effort towards something to put out. But I do think we have the material. Like I was thinking to say also, especially now that Pablo is here, Marty would be good as well. Like let's say there is an XORG site, and then it has this sort of, call them proposals or releases, like say there is a gene, and maybe that is a subsite, maybe it's a link of its own, whatever, but it uses the same basis, and it gives you this sort of like very short way of, okay, here's how it works. And then it might collect some examples of gems, but also different ways of playing with it, because there are such. And that is in itself a proposal. But like, I'm not saying that's some kind of final form, but it's kind of like thinking about the space of how does XORG appear to the outside world, and how such an appearance could be built. Because I do think, yeah, we have pieces to build it.
I totally agree that that is like one aspect of the thing, right? Like how do we appear outside? But I guess more what I was trying to point out was just like the simpler, like more like internal stuff that we were thinking about, like event stuff. I don't know, like just I don't know. I guess it's just the point I wanted to bring up because I do want to see us explore the conversation more, like even not just in regards to like how do we present ourselves externally, but like just like if we just start like playfully constructing an interface for our organization, like just through like Miro or something, right? Like super simple, just slots with names on them or something. And then yeah, or something, I don't know. And it could be cool, right? Like even if it's just stuff that's like, how are we feeling, right? And we just move like this token slider across and we just want to capture some stuff about the organization. But I think this like getting used to like interface composition and then just messing around with it is going to be really helpful in the coming months, not only for our own organization, but also because I believe that soon we will have the ability to really start doing that, and we can already mess around.
I mean, agreed. Yeah, like, and it might be a useful way to approach this, like these kind of structures. Like one of the, I think a key reason to have this sort of, let's say, maybe grammar is too large a word because like the Oxel in itself is a loose grammar, but it's still towards that kind of direction, like grammar likeness is useful because it can easily suggest different directions to take. But like turning this more into practice might be one way to, well, solidify those kind of grammar-like directions, but also find different directions for them. Like you just mentioned the sort of measure dial or kind of structure in itself. If I were to, just to give an example, every role in an organization has different measures. And I mean, conventional way, those measures could be, you know, happiness and so on, but like you could put any title on that measure and it changes. Like you could put like innovative, or you could put like weird. And then you can make a move that is, say, underneath that. And that move is like once every day, just check where you are on this measure. And then these measures are played in an organization or not. Now, what is interesting about that, or at least one thing that is interesting about that, that's very board game. It's like how board game designs a role of a player. It's kind of like, oh, I'm interested in this sort of dials, for example. And what kind of interactions come from the fact that I have dials, and what kind of dials I could have as a palette is a way then to start to see the horizon of play that could open from there. But that's just one snippet of an example. But it also provides a structure towards organization, but it provides it from really this sort of expansive palette of game-like design.
Yeah, like oh, sorry, please.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say like something just like, you know, I don't know, like making stupid fun board games, right? Like on a Miro board, but that somehow also have some form of something. I don't know. Like if we just made cards for ourselves on like a Miro board, and then like we would move them around like a calendar or something, or someone, we could have even a calendar on a Miro and then make different cards for different events and just move them around or something, you know, like super simple stuff, but we're already composing like very basic organizational infrastructure.
Yes, like making stupid fun organizations with making them like games. Like I've been lately, I was sharing this at the end of last session, but most of you weren't there, so I'll quickly share this. Well, this was mostly last week, but I'm kind of thinking about this. Still, let me get to the right image. Not this one, not this one, not this one, not this one. I think here. All right, so yeah, this one. So I'm been quite interested in the mechanical development, game mechanical development that has come in solo role-playing particularly, because it has proposed this very intensive challenge that there's only one player, like there's no GM, there's just one person playing, and then it's proposed the kind of language, the lexicon, the grammar of role-playing games. But how do you design? And this has been blooming up in terms of designs in the last 2-3 years. It's very recent, but like the approaches there are quite interesting in their takes, not just for singular persons, but because they face this intensity of like having to come to very fundamental design questions, because it has to be like you have so much less to work with. You have just one person, you don't have a group of people. So like I've been looking at kind of what is the kind of mechanical structural core of approaches that they come up with. And like this was an example from like, I think it came out just recently, like, or it might not even be out. It's like, this is why these are actually screen captures from a video. But so like here was a basic mechanic of location generation, which was this mechanic of that, okay, it's here, it's like first you roll a d4, or actually you first roll d20, which is this area table, and then you get an area. And of course, the point is not that it generates every area ever, but rather it generates areas that somehow fit the theme. So if you want something else, you make another area table. Oh, we're closing towards the end. There is other people coming in, but just
sorry, I need to
finishing.
jump on another call also. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll just finish this point quickly and then we can wrap up. So, but then with that, you have this sort of like fleshing out, populating, which is like adding details and adding different categories of details. So there is contents, environment, oddity, danger. In this case, could be something else in another case. But then, of course, these are the contents, oddities, etc. Like, so for here, the particular implementation is not so important, but like this pattern that you have like a framework, which is like a thematic, the area. But then you have these details, and what it's trying to build up is actually an operative space. And that opens to me this question is like, okay, this is trying to create an operative space that the person can generate for themselves to act like in a real environment. Now, how could such approaches could be taken into, say, an organization to generate not necessarily like physical environments, but maybe environments of operation, like what are the conditions, what are the situations for people who are, say, in a project, and what one could take from there. And I think it's highly interesting and potentially quite promising what one could use that. And it doesn't have to follow these models. It doesn't have to, have dice and throw, but it's more like, how do they express these things, and what is needed in expression of details versus thematic, and what kind of relations between them are important. So yeah, that's my let's say minor contribution to this possibility we've been thinking about of around concretization.
Yes, Yeah. Let's explore more later.
Yes.
And yeah, I also have some exciting stuff in regards to like data structure. How do we go from a data structure to an arbitrary data structure? So like what you just presented is a data structure, but as a table, right?
Yes.
And then how do we go from a data structure to a to like a generative interface arbitrarily? So yeah. Anyway, there are other people on the call. Also, I have to take a shower.
Yeah, I think they jumped off immediately by having a shock of coming somewhere else. But it's a sign that we should be ending, because I do think there is another call starting, and it's a good time sign as well, because we've been running for quite a while. So any last words? Yes, maybe the question to present. Or challenge, as it appears to be.
I challenge you guys. Yeah, I'm sure to some extent you guys have all in some way done this, but I challenge you guys to take one part of your living environment, which is not yet an interface, and to turn it into one.
I already have such.
I know for sure. I know for sure, but we can always do more.
No, but it's a good one. It's a good one. Like, that's why I also have them, because that is a good one. I'm thinking about this sort of interfacing, and also, if I'll add to that, like including that, because that's like I said, a good one, is like how to turn it into an expressive space where the expression turns into operative change. So turn it into an interface, but turn it into a space of expression, which then that expression changes how the space operates.
Let's make our environments programmable.
Like if you name your table the challenge, how is the table different? Like, to put a very banal example, but nevertheless, but like that's a pathway of it. And then when you start thinking about how to interact with it, you're in this question of the interface.
I'll send the challenge in the group chat, but I really I am waiting for photos.
Put it in Telegram, so it
I
becomes
will.
yeah, because I think it's a good general challenge overall. And I do think we already have tools towards that. Like more tools can be definitely created, but it's precisely a good framing, because we're not empty on that extent. Any last words, Pablo?
It's a bit noisy here, so I hope you cannot hear the construction.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I make the space play itself through us.
We are the interface.
All right. With that, I will stop the recording. I'll try to.